anything is certain, it is that change is certain. The world we are planning for today will not exist in this form tomorrow. The profound words of Phil Crosby, an American businessman and author. They aptly capture the time-tested dictum that change is the only constant in life. The changing phase of society, fueled by population growth, climate change and other socio-economic factors, are having a telling impact on agriculture in Nigeria, especially now that the country is turning to the sector in search of reprieve from the crippling impact of the dwindling value of oil. One of the most critical impacts of this changing phase is the deadly crisis between farmers protecting their crops and farmlands and herdsmen in search of green pasture. The crisis is often projected as having ethnic, religious, and sometimes political dimensions, but the crux of the matter is the struggle for shrinking natural resources worsened by a fast-growing population and climate change. And most importantly, the failure of leadership to anticipate and plan for these changes. On Farmers Market this week, we examine the festering crisis between farmers and herdsmen beyond the ethnic, religious, and political rhetoric. We also x-ray its impact on food sufficiency and Nigeria's agricultural resurgence.
If we got our livestock husbandry right to the right point, you won't dismiss these things. You recognize that these people have to pay taxes. If we were all paying our taxes, if everybody was a taxpayer, would you be able to dismiss a taxpayer? Huh? If we had the police service that is competent enough, structured enough, and available enough, would you be able to have murder at such a large scale without somebody holding you to account? So it's a complex picture. There are many, many layers of this thing. And I know people want a simple explanation. They want someone to blame. But that's the problem. Because every time you blame someone, you don't take responsibility for finding a solution.
Agriculture can only be sustainable if the farmer makes a profit. On Farmers Market, we know this. That's why we go the distance through rough, plain, and wet terrain to cover stories about Nigeria's agricultural resurgence. The issues may be small or big, unique to individual farmers or general. We cover them all because they come together to form the bigger picture. We listen to the farmers, understand their needs.
Accessing fertilizer is one of the challenges.
We experience their toils. Celebrate their successes.
This is exactly the young market, the biggest in Nigeria.
We seek information necessary to help them make a profit. Farmers Market, growing Nigeria's agro-economy. Showing every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. and Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. on AIT. A displaced people's camp in Bajimba, Guma local government area of Benue State. These are farming families who fled herdsmen raids in different villages across Guma local government area, abandoning their homes and farms to seek refuge here. Some of them were not lucky enough to get out of harm's way.
They killed one person in our house. He put his guinea corn in the farm. And this thing happened. The women are calling us to go because there have been attack in the farm. Then he rushed to go and carry the corn to the house. And then after they see him, then they kill him.
They enter our farm. Like that, the first farm they enter, it was my own. So they started cutting down the guinea corns burning all the surrounding that we kept in the farm. And anything that they see containing food, then they started eating it, destroying it anyhow.
The crisis between pastoralists and farmers has grown, spread and intensified in the past decade, resulting in the death of scores of farmers and herdsmen in many parts of the country and the destruction of communities and farms. The broader effect of this is the threat not just to food security and human life, but also to national unity. At the very root of the conflict between farmers and pastoralists is the struggle for land. Land for crop production, land for animal grazing. Unfortunately, land for the two critical agricultural activities is becoming increasingly scarce, no thanks to population growth and climate change. This scarcity has resulted in the seasonal movement of the pastoralists from the semi-arid zones of the country southwards into the savanna and tropical forest belt in search of green pasture and water as the seasons change. It is an age-long tradition that found acceptance in Nigeria as far back as the colonial era, and was made official in 1964 through a government gazette setting aside about 6.4 million hectares of the country's forest reserves, with 98% in the savanna. However, only about 2.3 million hectares of this land was ever surveyed, while most of the water and road projects to facilitate easy grazing were also abandoned. Apart from this, the dramatic increase in the revenue from oil by the early 1970s led to the relegation of almost all agricultural policies and programs, including further development and implementation of the grazing reserve policy. In 1964, when the grazing reserve policy was made official, Nigeria's population was 49.17 million. Between 1980, when 2.3 million hectares was eventually surveyed for grazing, and 2013, the country's population had grown from 73.7 million to 173.6 million. Today, it is projected that the population is about 200 million. The implication of this is that the fast-growing population and urbanization are fast taking over the grazing reserves.
It's not the same Nigeria that you had in the 50s, when cattle routes were designated and grazing areas were designated. Then, in the 50s, you had a population of less than 40 million. The land was the same, 923,000 square kilometers. Today, the land has not increased. We are over 200 million by estimation. But the land is not even up to the 923,000 kilometers because of the ceding of Bakassi to the Cameroons. So, human activities have taken up everywhere: federal roads, marketplaces, settlements, hospitals, schools, and all that. So where is the land? So we must migrate from the colonial or the nomadic way of thinking and doing things. It is impossible to think that you will live in the 50s when you are living in 2018.
In Benue State, Guma local government area has become the hotspot for the herders and farmers conflict because of its great natural endowment, vast land area, and the presence of major rivers: the Benue, Katsina Ala, and River Guma, from which the local government gets its name.
The Fadamatri rates Benue, especially Guma local, this my local government, Guma local government, as the highest producer of rice in Benue State, because we have water in every place. We have a lot of Fadama land. So it is very easy to cultivate rice here. We are getting a lot here. And if you go to the market now, you will see rice that have been heaped there by IFAD, this Olam. They are the people buying the products from us. If you go to market, you will see the number of bags of rice that have been bought by Olam. They have not even bought anything, not even 1/4 of the rice. Then these people struck.
These factors also make it attractive to cattle herders. But during the dry season, the grasses dry up and the water bodies recede. Tributaries from the main rivers like this one dry up too, worsening the struggle between herders and farmers.
Sometimes the farmers, the community people use water, use the river to fetch their own drinking water, and it's the same water the animal used to drink. And whenever the animal, that is the cattle, went to the river and drink the water will be contaminated because of their leg. So the water will be damaged. The community people have to wait for some certain period of time or hours when everything is pure. When the water turns to pure, they will now go and fish. So it's another fact that causes problem between the farmers and the pastoralists, lack of water.
Matsala ta mu ce kawai ta rashin fili, amma a sauran yankuna abin da ke faruwa matsala ce ta lafiya.
Our major problem is lack of grazing field. The setback we normally have is that of passing through farmland. We travel on a particular route to the east or west, and on coming back, we find farms on the same route, and there is no alternative route, so it becomes a problem between the farmer and the Fulani herdsmen. In essence, we must separate between farmlands and grazing routes for cattle. That's our major problem.
The
real Fulanis, we don't have problem with them because we stay in for years upon years. We never encounter any problem because they can graze over your crops. Even in your absence, tomorrow they come back to tell you that, my friend, I've passed through your farm and this is the damage I caused. And the issue will be over.
With Nigeria's population at about 200 million, the struggle for land between farmers and herdsmen has already assumed a deadly dimension. It is not difficult to imagine what will happen by 2050 when Nigeria is projected by the United Nations to become the third most populous country in the world.
From detailed literature review and analysis of agricultural transformation systems globally, it was evidently clear that the Nigerian agricultural system is witnessing a gradual revolution or change from subsistence agriculture into commercial agriculture. And the pastoralists, in our understanding, are the first test case. The next will be the peasant farmers, whose lands will soon be taken over by large-scale entrepreneurs who will be engaged in large-scale mechanized agriculture. And I think this is one great challenge that Nigeria has to do, to develop the capacity of the peasant farming population, the peasant pastoral population, build their capacities to be able to respond to these emerging changes.
Another dimension to the crisis is the fact that not all pastoralists who move within Nigeria are Nigerians. The ECOWAS Transhumance Protocol of 1998 and the Regional Protocol of Free Movement of Goods and Persons allow foreign cattle herders to move through the country.
You cannot solve the problem of livestock in Nigeria without going transnational. Are you with me? You can't. So making it a nation-state issue, we're just talking about Lake Chad drying up to about 80%. Doesn't that tell you something? Do you know that the Fulani livestock goes all the way to Addis Ababa area, to Oromo area of Ethiopia? We're talking about a complex transnational system. We have to have the capacity and the sophistication to think through all of these things, to map out. But when you have people who don't have the patience, are you with me? They don't have the patience to even think beyond the transaction that they're in.
With the crisis taking an increasingly critical dimension, Nigerians are beginning to seek workable solutions. An example is the Council of State, the highest presidential advisory body, which recently proffered a three-pronged solution of cattle routes mapping, grazing reserves, and ranching.
The Honorable Minister of Agriculture also presented a position on how to solve the first part of the farmers-herdsmen clashes. That is the actual migrating herdsmen that's passed through towns and farms, eats up crops in the farms, and create a lot of problems. So he presented a paper on that and proposed a lot of solutions, ranging from, for those states that have the availability of identifying the already gazetted cattle routes, grazing reserve, and activating the grazing reserve so that the farmers and herdsmen can live in harmony. So if the cattle routes are being segregated and identified, and grazing reserve separated and identified, like the case we have in Jigawa, there might be less or no clashes. That is on those states that have the possibility to do this. And in other states that don't have the possibility to do this, ranching was proposed, and the federal government promised to support the states and indeed the Fulanis or the livestock producers to settle in one place and do their businesses like it's done in the modern way.
These recommendations may provide temporary succor for the farmers and pastoralists if done right. But in the long run, experts hold strongly that Nigeria needs a holistic policy for crop and livestock development.
The only policy framework that you can see on the paper is the grazing reserve development. We have been talking about ranching. There is no policy on ranching development in this country. There is no policy on the management of rural lands in this country. There is no policy on crop intensification in this country. So all of this that we have been hearing are just mere statements by political leaders, mere statements by policymakers. But to bring in the professionals to sit down and put this into concrete actionable plans is lacking. Now, one of the innovative ways by which many stakeholders told us is that, look, crops and livestock are produced jointly and integrated. So it is not about separating crops and livestock production, but integrating crops and livestock production. So one of the major recommendations we have is that we need to set up integrated crop livestock production systems, models, and mechanisms whereby farmers and cattle rearers living within a particular community can be brought in together and organized in such a way that they will develop the same land areas for crops and livestock production, enabling beneficial exchanges between crop and livestock farmers, supporting the improvement of livelihoods and nutrition among all of these groups, as well as, breaking that barrier between these are livestock producers and these are crop producers, such that our communities will become more harmonious, more interdependent, and more interconnected, like we used to have in the 1960s and 1970s.
Varieties of highly nutritious rice in Abakaliki or Fada, Kano, yet Nigeria wastes billions on rice importation.
cocoa in the southwest, and yet top dollar is spent on imported chocolate and beverages.
Fruits rot in Benue, Nasarawa, Kogi, yet imported juice line the shops.
82 million hectares of rich arable land, yet no jobs, and food insecurity threatens.
Real wealth is in farming, livestock, hatcheries, fisheries, horticulture, and forestry.
It's time to act different.
Time to bring Nigerian farmers to the markets.
Farmers Market, growing Nigeria's agroeconomy.
Showing every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. and Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. on AIT.
Over the years, a major challenge of the livestock sector in Nigeria has been lack of attention, despite its contributions and importance to the country's economy.
Cattle rearing is part of agriculture. The herdsman is a farmer, except that his method of farming has become a problem. If you go across the globe, ranches all over the world are sustained very heavily by governments. In Europe, the subsidy per cow per farm is €6 per day. €6 per day. At the current exchange rate, that's like 2,400 naira per cow per day on a farm in Europe. Why? Because they need milk and milk products. So since we support farmers who grow cassava and rice and maize and sorghum and yams and beans and sesame seed through our support program in the ministry, there's nothing wrong with supporting cattle rearing.
Nigeria is the largest producer of livestock in West Africa, with 31.66% of the region's cattle, 43.3% of sheep, 51.98% of goats, and 57.11% of pigs. Despite these, animal products form a considerable part of Nigeria's food import burden, while majority of Nigerians suffer stunted physical development because of poor protein intake.
We're calling for the government to do another round of animal census so that we know exactly what is our livestock density. What we know released by the FAO based on their 2003 report is that Nigeria has 43% of the entire cattle density of West Africa, which is massive. Nigeria also has the largest livestock market in terms of consumption in Lagos. Like you all know, Lagos consumes about 6,000 cattle per day. That's about 120 trailers a day, with a consumption value of 1.5 billion daily, and that is massive.
19.5 million cattle, yet Nigeria spends $1.3 billion annually on milk import. This is because no serious planning has gone into livestock production apart from poultry.
What seems to be lacking is not the knowledge among policymakers, but the failure for us as a society, as professionals, as governments, as civil society, as media, to come together on a round table and bring in the farmers, bring in the pastoralists, and develop strategic interventions that will lead us to address these issues. And at the second level, to sustainably implement this with vigor, seriousness, and determination.
Somalia, as Wharton of Somalia, 2 years ago exported over 5 million herds of cattle to the MENA region, meaning Middle East and North Africa. Somalia. Why? Because Somalia has a functional animal identification system. And Djibouti has a livestock density of 290, not optimal local government in Nigeria today. Their entire livestock density of Djibouti is 290. But they have a functional animal identification system. But I'm telling you, Nigeria, with 43% of the entire livestock density of West Africa, doesn't have a functional animal identification system, meaning you cannot legally export 1 kilogram of beef out of Nigeria. You can see the potentials that we are losing. If we have a national livestock identification system, forget about the curbing of the cattle rustling. It will open up foreign exchange earning for our country. It will include it will also invite multinational corporations like the McDonald's, the Subways, the Burger Kings. We have credible report that is why they are not in Nigeria today, because we don't have a meat traceability system. When you go to Europe or America, when you order a plate of steak, you can now trace backwards where that meat is coming from. That is internationally what is supposed to be in place. But at the moment, we don't have that in place.
The current crisis between pastoralists and farmers calls for a serious reflection on how to adapt the crucial agricultural activities of crop and livestock production to the changing times. It calls for the willingness of all concerned to suffer the temporary discomfort of change in order to achieve a better future. That farmers' market for this week.